Just okay. The recording has started. Hey, everybody here at My Metabolic Life. Thrilled to introduce you all to Lisa. Lisa's got a great story that I find fascinating in a number of different aspects. And I came across her on another podcast channel, The Metabolic Mind. Feel free to go and after this, listen to her conversation with Dr. Brett Scher. It's fascinating stuff. Metabolic Mind goes into all metabolic health, but focuses predominantly on mental health situations. And one of the things that really fascinated me was not just Lisa's ability to talk about everything, is that most of what I tend to focus on this channel is very much about what gets fully reversed through metabolic therapy. And there are conditions, though, that can be tremendously improved. And there are some conditions that for most people are going to be a lifetime of managing the conditions. And that's a little bit more what we're talking about here when we're referencing type 1 diabetes. So Lisa, if you could take a minute, introduce yourself, tell us, I'd love to hear a little bit about your origin story, which kind of got you interested in where we all have our interesting ways how we stumble over all of this stuff and how it led you to then creating the company and what you do with your company. I'm going to zip it and the floor is all yours. Thanks for joining me today, Lisa.
Thanks so much, Brett. It's great to be here. Well, my name is Lisa Lanasa. I have type 1 diabetes, or as the diabetes community says, I am a person living with type 1 diabetes. And I was diagnosed in my early 20s. I grew up with a strong family history of type 1 diabetes. Both my mom and my brother are type 1s, and they were diagnosed many years before I was. So my mom was diagnosed when I was 5. My brother was diagnosed when I was 10, I believe. And so I really grew up as a sibling and a daughter to type 1 diabetics long before I was diagnosed in my 20s. I knew I was, first of all, I should back up. I was a part of a study at the University of Minnesota as a teenager, as a sibling of diabetics. And at that point, they knew that I had what they called at that time in the early 90s, delayed pancreatic function. So what that really means is that I had a slow phase 1 insulin response. So that's usually the first thing that goes for type 1 diabetics. It's the pancreas's reaction to the carbohydrates that you're eating. And so generally my blood sugar level would come back down to the baseline after a certain amount of time. But at least in the beginning, my insulin response was delayed. So we knew as a teenager that I was heading towards type 1 diabetes. Most people wouldn't know that early, but at that point, there was absolutely nothing that we could do about it. It was just kind of a throw your hands up in the air and say, okay, well, let's wait and see. So it wasn't until my 20s that I was starting to have other health issues. I had been diagnosed with clinical depression, which now I can see was because of dysregulation of blood sugar levels. I without a doubt, that's what was contributing to the depressive symptoms that I was having. And I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes shortly thereafter. Although it's funny because at that point as well, they diagnosed me as type 2. I was in my 20s, type 1 diabetics can't be diagnosed, after your teenage years, right? Or at least that's what my medical professionals had thought at that time. Even though I stressed my strong family history, I knew exactly what it was, but they still said no because of your age, it's type 2. So I went over the course of a weekend. It wasn't very long. Some people, unfortunately, are diagnosed with type 2 for years before they actually get a correct LADA or adult onset type 1 diagnosis. But thankfully, mine was only stretched over the weekend where they gave me metformin and they told me to check my blood sugar level. I saw an endocrinologist early the next week and she immediately put me on insulin based on my family history. So I'm thankful for that. During the course of the first, 10 to 13 years, I did the very best I could. I saw an endocrinologist regularly. I followed the recommendations. I used an insulin pump for most of that time. This was before continuous glucose monitors were available. So I checked my blood sugar level at regular intervals. I did everything that my doctors were telling me. And I felt increasingly bad, depressive symptoms. I was having symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome, really, really uncomfortable digestive symptoms. And my kidney function tests were also coming back as starting to show protein in the urine. So that's a signal of kidney damage. And this was within the first 10 to 13 years of diagnosis. Most of the time people would assume that diabetic complications happen after many, many years. But this was already showing after 10 years of having decent blood sugar levels, or decent according to what my doctors were saying. Yes. So it was within, my highest A1C ever was 7.8. Usually my A1Cs were between 6.8 and 7.8. So the American Diabetes Association suggests a target of 7. So I was right around that target the entire time, and yet I was having these health symptoms. And it was becoming increasingly difficult to just go about my everyday life. So I luckily had the opportunity to move around the world. I went to South America. I was still seeing, my regular medical professionals, living in some of the most beautiful places ever in Patagonia. I was, of course, eating whatever I wanted to and dosing insulin for it, which is exactly what my doctors were telling me I needed to do. Just say, just count your carbohydrates, inject your insulin, and if you need to make a correction, either with if you have a low blood sugar level, you have some juice, or if you have a high blood sugar level, you take more insulin. Easy peasy, right? Well, absolutely not, because we have blood sugar variations that are extreme. And I mentioned in the interview that you referenced earlier with Metabolic Mind, that I was having blood sugar variations between 40 and 400. For people who aren't familiar with that, baseline is generally around 100. What I focus on now is even below that. So I focus on target between 80 and 100 milligrams per deciliter for my blood sugar level target. And so you can really see how 40 to 400, it's a huge, huge extreme. And what an effect that must have on the body and the mind. It's just astonishing thinking about it now. So I was living in some of these most beautiful areas. Yes.
I just have you deep dive. I'm just really curious, because when you say 400, were you able to get your mind around what was coming in the mouth that was leading to the 400 levels at those times?
At that point, I knew it had to do with the foods that I was eating. But I would also talk to my doctors about it, and they would say, oh no, you don't have to give that up. At that point in my life, I was baking all the time. And so I was making scones and cakes and muffins and pancakes. And, I was making all of these really carbohydrate rich foods. And my doctors were saying, oh yeah, that's fine. Just take your insulin for it. But we also have the other extreme with a very low blood sugar level, that our bodies just go into survival mode. And when you're having a very low blood sugar level, which is common for type 1s, you have these big extremes, you take insulin for it, then you crash down low and you have a very low blood sugar level. That gets to be an emergency situation. And at that point, your body craves carbohydrates because it goes into survival mode. You have to have some sort of sugar or carbohydrate in order to get your blood sugar level up. So we joke about it in the diabetes community, saying that, you ate the whole refrigerator or you ate the whole kitchen, because it's just this panic mode that you have to eat and you have to eat now. And so that's that's what happened frequently. And oftentimes overnight, I would wake up in the middle of the night with a low blood sugar level. I would literally go to the kitchen, sit on the kitchen floor, and eat whatever I could to get my blood sugar level up. And then, of course, it just swings back the other way because I ate so much that my blood sugar level goes high again, and just repeat, up and down and up and down. And so it was a really, really frustrating and horrible time, particularly this time that I was living in Patagonia and doing all of this baking. And now, of course, I can see it so clearly that the time of these huge blood sugar level excursions it was the time of my most severe mental health symptoms. It was my absolute rock bottom. And so I thankfully was able to make a commitment to my future and my kids and my marriage and say, okay, I have to figure this out. I want to live. I have to figure this out. I have to find some way that I can claw myself back to health, because this is no way to live. And I couldn't imagine, at that point, I was in my early 30s. I was trying to figure out, how the heck am I going to be living for 30, 40, 50 more years with these symptoms, both mental and physical health symptoms. So thankfully, I was able to make that commitment to myself to say, I have to figure this out. And I was absolutely obsessed after that point to say, okay, there must be something better out here. There must be something I'm missing. My doctors aren't telling me what to do. I have to take control of myself and figure out what my future is going to look like. So I joined some Facebook groups, and they were, for the most part, telling me exactly what I already knew. And there was lots of people that were experiencing the same types of things that I was experiencing. There were lots of jokes about it in the diabetes community. Like I said, eating the whole kitchen and the frustration, and this people talk about their dead pancreas and everything. We know that's not true. Your pancreas isn't dead just because it doesn't make insulin. But there are lots of jokes within the type 1 diabetes community to really as coping mechanisms, because it's a really, really awful condition. And like you said earlier, it is a lifelong condition. It's considered something that, is going to be progressive, and your health is going to worsen over time. And there's really nothing that you can do about it. Certainly, you should try to keep your blood sugar levels steadier, but we're not given the tools to be able to make your blood sugar levels steadier. Like I said, I was doing everything my doctors were telling me to. I was making the adjustments that they were telling me to do. But never once did they say, have you considered a low carbohydrate or ketogenic diet? Never once. Even to this day, never once have I heard that from a doctor. So thankfully, within some of these Facebook groups that I was a part of, one brave person posted a near perfect continuous glucose monitor graph. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen before. Just this gorgeous little line with just these tiny movements. Of course, like I said earlier, mine were up to 40 or up to 400, down to 40. It looked like a roller coaster. This one was just fantastic. And maybe I can share what mine looks right now, which is very close to, I'm just scanning my, oh yeah, mine's doing pretty well here, 99. So very flat. This is what it looked like. And I thought, oh my goodness, I've never seen anything like that before in my life. I didn't even know that was possible. So I started asking questions. How do you do this? What are your methods? How did you stumble upon this? And this person pointed me to Dr. Bernstein's Diabetes Solution book, which I then purchased. I was in the middle of Argentina. I purchased it on Kindle. And I can't say that that was the end of the story, though, because at that point, I read the book and I thought, this is too hard. This is for other people. This is not for me. I can't do this. I had no confidence that I could change the way I ate. I pushed back against it. I knew based on that food had something to do with it. I understand, okay, this makes sense, but this is just too restrictive for me. I'm not going to give up my scones and my cakes and my pasta and my bread, and that's impossible. So I shelved it for another year, and I tried all sorts of other things. So I tried a vegan cleanse, I did paleo, I did all sorts of different things to try to figure out what the magic combination of food and insulin might be. And nothing even came close to what Dr. Bernstein's Diabetes Solution book promised. So at that point, I said, okay, well, what else? I have nothing to lose. I've tried everything else. I know that food is a portion of this. Maybe this is the answer. Maybe I can do this. So it was actually my New Year's resolution, 2015, that I said, okay, fine, throw your hands up in the air. Fine, nothing else is working. I have to try this. Let's see how it goes. And within a couple days, I was reducing my insulin. I was starting to feel better. My brain fog was lifting. I was feeling, certainly the first few days are hard. You're trying to figure out, okay, what can I eat? What can't I eat? How is this going to look? How is this going to fit into my life? But even within the first few days, I was starting to feel better, and I was starting to reduce my insulin. And with that reduction of insulin, I was also seeing that my blood sugar levels were much steadier. They were much more controlled. And that was astonishing to me, because I was starting to finally get a glimpse of what this person online was experiencing when they had this beautiful flat blood sugar graph. And I thought, oh my goodness, this might be it. Could this really be it? So I went back and forth for a little while, but I thought, okay, I'll just do another day. I'll do another 4 days. I'll do another week. And then it kept getting better as I kept refining my insulin intake, kept refining my foods, finding foods that I really love to eat that also help to support my blood sugar levels. And within a month, I knew that this was what my life was going to look like going forward. It was just so astonishing that my whole life changed based on making that change to the food that I was putting in my body. I had no clue that nutrition was that powerful. So it was a whole paradigm shift, and I haven't looked back since, and that was 9 years ago now.
That's amazing.
So then based on that, my husband encouraged me to start writing about it. He said, well, this was after 9 months of following this way of eating. He said, okay, you have to tell people about this. There's so many people out there that have no clue that this is even an option. So you have to start writing about this. He said, you're a good writer, so start a blog or something. And that's exactly what I did. So in September of 2015, I started a blog and started a Facebook page, called it Diverge Diabetes, kind of creating the divergent path of diabetes management. And I started having people find me. So it all really developed so naturally based on that point, because I think so many people with type 1 diabetes are looking for answers. They're saying, this can't be it. This is no way to live. I don't want to go down that path of diabetes complications. So it's really been interesting to see how the whole world of diabetes management and the whole world of ketogenic management has expanded over the last 9 years. It's been really encouraging to see the growth in this market.
There used to be, I don't think it exists any longer, an online digital diabetes magazine by the name, I think, The Sweet Life. Were you familiar with that?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I've become, as we were talking before this started, I'm going to Washington, D.C. for a rally called the Metabolic Revolution. And the editor and founder of A Sweet Life, Jessica Apple, I don't know.
Apple, yeah, yes.
So I get to meet her this weekend. And we're all going to be together as trying to get this organization and
Mhm.
more of a movement than an organization
Right.
off the ground. And so yeah, because she was a prolific writer, wrote
Mhm.
450 different articles inside of that, and she had an interesting scenario with her life as well, of
Mhm.
having kind of a, as she described it, a unique form of type 1, not as normal, even though I'm
Mhm.
not the expert at all of the variations of type 1 out there. But yes, I realized very early on that, oh, you can really
Mhm.
manage this and keep
Yes.
those glucose levels like this. And that, while your doctors weren't telling you, and I'm not saying it's malicious, it's how they're trained, it's how the world operates. But were they also telling you that, well, by being a type 1, your life expectancy is expected to be about, is it 15 to 20 years less than the average lifespan? Did that ever get mentioned, or in some of your support groups, did that ever come up?
That was always an undercurrent, kind of below the surface, saying that, okay, you can expect to have, um, complications, and it usually is retinopathy, which can lead to blindness. It's neuropathy, which can lead to amputation. It's all of these really horrific things. And, of course, it was implied that that would shorten your lifespan. I don't remember anybody actually saying that, but yeah, that's just the way of type 1 diabetes, right?
Another thing we can't do
Hmm.
anything
Right.
about,
Right.
and we just have to deal with it and live with it.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think a lot of it actually comes down to the there are things that the body needs. We seek homeostasis. We want nice even glucose, and with that we get a nice even insulin. But when
Hmm.
you've got a pinball machine going on, that high hyperinsulinemia is a
Hmm.
problem and
Hmm.
creates many different issues, including some of the things, as we were talking before, my heart disease and the plaque in my arteries and stuff like
Yes.
this, that it can be very scarring to the endothelial layer in the arteries. We realize that the high glucose, super high levels that get to the brain can't handle that. And we believe now that they're turning it into fructose, which again can't get
Hmm.
metabolized in the brain and is leading to the amyloid plaques that we see going along with the people with Alzheimer's, why we're now calling that type 3 diabetes. And all of these things are just so interrelated. But how much deep diving have you done on Dr. Bernstein himself and kind of his history with everything?
I'm very familiar with Dr. Bernstein and his history. I actually was able to interview him in person in New York, um, many years ago. Let's see, I think it was about shortly after I started writing about my experience in his book. So that was incredible, just to call up his office and say, "Hey, I'm going to be in New York. Can I stop by and interview you?" And he was so wonderful. So yes, Um, I have on the Diverge website, I have information about the interview series that I did with him, and it was just fantastic. He is an amazing gift to the diabetes community, both type 1 and type 2, because really his book covers both. And I really love that, because so many people divide type 1 and type 2 and say, oh no, they're totally different things, totally different causes. And while that may be true, there are a lot of people who fall in the middle, who have been misdiagnosed or who have traits of both type 1 and type 2. And Dr. Bernstein says it doesn't matter what your title is or what your diagnosis is. Once you're taking insulin, the treatment is largely the same. And that's absolutely true. So that's something that we have found in our work at Diverge Diabetes, that once you're taking insulin, Treatment is largely the same. Granted, we find that some groups have maybe higher insulin resistance than others. You might need to take more mealtime insulin, et cetera. But, that's a very small distinction. And we're all personal, or we all have to take a very personalized approach to how much insulin we take, the timing of it, et cetera. So those little distinctions don't really matter too much in the grand scheme of things.
Well, I just had a question hit as you were saying
Yeah.
that about the individual personalized approach, but there was something else I just wanted to follow up
Mhm.
first on, Dr. Bernstein. One of the things that I find fascinating, and correct me if I'm wrong, I might be misremembering this, but he didn't go right into medicine and become an MD early on. Wasn't he an engineering background at first?
He was in engineering, yes. And it was because of his engineering background that he really used his engineer's mindset to create his own health. So he was the one who was testing everything out on himself. He was the one who had these original theories to say, okay, maybe, I can test my blood sugar and see how this food reacts with my blood sugar, what impact this food has on my blood sugar. And then he was able to reverse engineer it and say, okay, well, if this creates the biggest impact and this creates the smallest impact, well, that makes sense that I should just focus on foods that create the smallest impact. And then he was trying to get his information published about what he had discovered and was getting just an incredible amount of pushback against it because he was not a medical professional. So even though he was able to get some medical professionals to sign on to what he was doing at the time, he wasn't really getting anywhere with publishing this information. So he said, well, okay, I'm going to go to medical school. So he went to medical school in his 40s and started his private practice shortly thereafter and published his information, and he's still practicing today.
It's amazing. I've
Mhm.
paid attention to many of his appearances across the YouTube podcast verse in the world, and so I get to see him on the screen as well,
Mhm.
and he's talking about how he's still working out and pumping iron
Oh yeah,
and doing things, and he's what, in his late 90s now?
in his 90s.
In his 90s.
I can't remember exactly his age. He just had a birthday this past summer, but I can't remember. But
But
I believe early 90s.
the reason I wanted to ask about the engineer and make sure I had that right is I'm not a doctor. I never went to medical school. I'm a public relations major, marketing minor coming out of college. But I've spent my whole career in sales, health insurance related, population health management related, pharma related. But so I've been around healthcare forever. And the crazy thing is that once I kind of tripped upon this idea of, what is this low carb keto thing my brother just lost 30 pounds doing? And I'm like, and I start going down the rabbit hole. Some of the people who have done some of the amazing ability to figure out what everybody who's trained and goes through medical school and all these things never ever dawns on them. I think that the whole world is so trapped on the dogma and kind of the compliance taught, respect authority, bow to authority, and you are a peon right down here, and now the person with the longest medical coat at the med school is who we bow down to.
Mhm.
But they're not really taught what I'll call critical thinking skills. They're great at memorizing information and taking tests and regurgitating that information. But when it's the engineers, they have to live with the empirical data. If data doesn't match the hypothesis, we've got to figure out where the mismatch is with all of this. And so kind of two engineers that have made a huge impact in my life and world is one, Ivor Cummins out of Ireland. And when I first kind of got down this rabbit hole, he had gone down a similar one himself like 7-8 years before. And he was chief troubleshooter in charge of the whole engineering department for some very large multinational companies. And he realized that his doctors had no explanation for what is going on, why he's having these GGT, ALK, AST numbers, and all these other things. And so he had the ability to go into the medical journals, pull stuff, and he started making sense of it. And he goes, none of the doctors understand any of this. It took him a couple dozen hours to get his brain around what's happening. And so he was just incredibly instrumental. And then also Feldman in, from
yes,
the LDL and the lean mass hyper responder, Dave Feldman. And these are, again, people who are coming up against medical issues, and they're trying to dive into where the science and where we're supposed to know everything. And they just like, the empirical data is not here. It doesn't make sense with what the dogma is out in the world. How can we be so certain about these things that there's really no data and science for? So I found them both very early in my first 2-3 months of kind of going down this rabbit hole. And I laughed when you said year 1 because it was November, December that I went down the rabbit hole for about 60 hours, thinking I'm going to save my younger brother's life because he was losing all this weight, doing things with saturated fat, and that might lead to LDL, and people in the community talking about, you got to understand more about LDL. It's not what we think it is or have been taught that it is. And I'm just like, so I decided, okay, 1 is going to be my go-to. I started phasing out the unhealthy carbs in December, and you heard 115 pounds in 9 months, and all of those medical conditions on my poster. But I just find it fascinating that some of the people that are changing the world and how we understand metabolic health aren't coming out of conventional healthcare, medicine, MD.
No. And in addition to that, to Dave Feldman and Ivor Cummings, Marty Kendall, also an engineering background, and also a type 1, strong family history of type 1 diabetes there too. And of course, like we said, Dr. Bernstein, who, of course, I implied that he was type 1 diabetic, but I didn't actually say it out loud, that Dr. Bernstein is a type 1 himself. And he was diagnosed in the 1940s when he was only 12 years old. So considering that he has actually lived until his 90s, that's incredible. That was absolutely unheard of for somebody that was diagnosed when he was. So
you could say thriving in his 90s. He's not a frail old guy.
Right.
He's a vibrant, and his brain is so sharp. It's incredible.
And there's, I think, something for everybody to learn in this discussion here that we're talking about engineering. And I've talked about this to my audience several times before, but tapping into the engineering mindset, tapping into the curiosity and the problem solving, I think is a whole different way of thinking about health, and something that we're not usually taught as patients. So all of these examples that we've talked about, these are people who started diving into this because of their own health conditions or because of something that was happening in their immediate families. And so if we as non-medical professionals can all tap into that, I think there's just such incredible potential in that.
Absolutely. I don't know if you're aware of it. Beyond this podcast that I have, I do a second one, which I'm recording back to back today, with Dr. Ryan Cooley, who's a cardiologist and friend of mine that I've known since we grew up as teenage tennis players, taking lessons, and then in college giving lessons and things like that. But one of the things that caught me so off guard was I refer to it as, in 2018, I broke my brain heavily because of Dr. Sarah Hallberg as a major instrumental, realizing that, Virta Health, type 2 diabetes reversal. I spent 10 years in the industry. We never reversed one hypertensive, one diabetic, one anything. And we'll circle back in a minute also on my new obsession with the word idiopathic. But when I had that light bulb go off on me, and I'm like, you mean these aren't chronic progressive conditions? So now I just lost where I was going with that. But let's jump in for a quick minute. Then I want to turn to your company. one of the things that has been a more recent epiphany of mine through all of this is that how we use our diagnostic codes. So in health insurance, you do all the data and the actuarial and the underwriting comes out of what's happening out of these CPT diagnostic codes that we have going on. And it wasn't until I realized more recent, and it makes me feel ashamed that it took me this long to put this bullet point together, that, almost everything that doctors are starting with new diagnoses for patients. Lisa, you have idiopathic hypertension. Lisa, you have idiopathic type 2 diabetes. You have idiopathic this, you have idiopathic, and it's, it's, I believe, the Latin word for of no known origin. And I think this is actually, here I'm going to put my conspiratorial hat on for a quick second and just say, well, they're still not teaching the things that you and I know and understand and are helping, and millions of people's lives around the world are being transformed by understanding the root cause. And again, type 1, different than type 2 from an origin standpoint, but the reversal of type 2 and the managing and living like Dr. Bernstein into your 90s with type 1 is from understanding metabolic health, understanding what's going on with the glucose and the insulin, understanding what we'll call insulin resistance and how it manifests in so many different things. And I can't believe that the med schools just aren't teaching this to the med students today. Our dietitians, our med students, our RNs who all graduate, they are taught to hear the word ketosis, not understanding that there's two sides of the coin to ketosis. Oh, it's a physiologic state that every baby is born in, and that probably the vast 90% of the population lived in until about the last 100 years, when we've introduced so much crap that we've knocked ourselves out of this natural physiologic state. But from just the whole coding standpoint, if everything's idiopathic that the doctor is working with, it becomes a brain disconnect. It never allows them to put their critical thinking cap on and say, well, this is of an idiopathic, it's of an unknown origin. So they get to live in that illusion that we don't know what's causing so many of these things. Because once you understand what it is, and then you can do a quick little Google search and maybe find a YouTube video or two to explain these things, people wind up curing themselves without ever needing to come to 4 or 5 doctor appointments, all the medications. Once you realize it's just kind of a lifestyle driven or exasperated by lifestyle driven in the type 1 scenario. So to me, that's just kind of a crazy thing. I don't know if you've ever put those two together before. I'll let you go with that for a minute.
Yeah, you make a fantastic point there that the mainstream medical system in most of the Western world, if not all of the Western world, is still considered, management of symptoms. So they're not concerned with root cause at all. You have to go to the holistic doctors or the integrative doctors necessarily, and they're generally considered still somewhat fringe. So, it's really interesting that for all of my health symptoms, I was put on all sorts of different medications. And that is often what we see with type 1s, with type 2s, with the general population. You're put on something for hypertension. You're put on something for, blood sugar control. You're put on something for, digestive issues. You have all sorts of various medications that you're using because of all the various symptoms that you're experiencing. Not one doctor goes into root cause. And if you mention another symptom that you're having, they'll send you to another specialist who is going to put you on another medication, it's this horrible treatment of symptoms, nobody looking at what is in our lifestyle, what is in our environment that's actually causing this. And I think once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you experience what we both experienced, you can't unsee that. So it's So frustrating though.
So when you said you were put on a number of different medications, and I
Mhm.
imagine there's still some level of insulin that you are
Yes.
injecting, correct?
I will always be insulin dependent.
Hmm.
So that is one thing that I'm not saying that this is a cure for type 1. I will always be insulin dependent. But the fact is that I am using about half of the insulin that I used to. And my blood sugar levels are so much easier to control. So it's a win-win situation for me. Not only am I avoiding the hyperinsulinemia of, injecting these huge doses of insulin, I'm also, uh, avoiding the low blood sugar levels that were caused by that as well. So, and I'm off of all of my other medications that I was on. I was on antidepressants. I was told to take medication for potential future heart issues that happen with type 1 diabetes. There are all sorts of benchmarks within the type 1 diabetes um, medical care that say, oh, you're over 40, you have to take this, you have to take a statin, you have to take, because of the progressive nature of type 1 diabetes for the general population. So I am off of everything except for insulin at this point.
Oh, that's just incredible. So happy to hear it, and it's a message we need to get out there. And
Mhm.
if you also then just kind of follow the money aspect of what's going on and who funds the medical schools and everything, it's the big food, it's the big pharma, and they don't want us off of their stuff,
No.
honestly. So I think that factors into why we don't get taught both sides of the ketosis coin in med school. So you were okay. So you're off all your medications.
Mhm.
You've been writing a blog, and
Mhm.
then what was the genesis or the little seed that became the mighty oak, the acorn that decided to start a company? Can you tell me more about that, please?
Yes. So it was September 2015 that I started writing about my experiences and writing about Dr. Bernstein and his book and what his book taught. So I was really synthesizing the information in the book based on my own personal experiences. What I did, some things that I might have changed just a little bit based on my lifestyle. At that, I was in my mid 30s. I was not, somebody in his late 70s who had written this book. So of course, there are certain lifestyle type of issues, food things that I did differently than what Dr. Bernstein taught. And as a part of the Facebook group, or Facebook page, I should say, that I started, people started contacting me saying, this is really interesting. I never knew that this was an option. Can you help me? Can you teach me about this? And that was something that I never even considered at that point. I did not set off to create a company to help people with type 1 diabetes around the world. And it really has just grown from there. I was helping people just in my spare time in the beginning. And then so many people started contacting me. I said, okay, I'm going to have to charge something for this because this is just taking up a huge portion of my time. I was a stay-at-home mom with young kids at that point. So I said, okay, well, I'll charge a little bit and help. And people were leaving great reviews for me and word spread. And so now let's see, about 5 years ago, I hired Allison Hershey, who is a registered nurse and a certified diabetes educator. She is also a type 1 herself, and we have really grown the company together with her great personal and medical background. She has been absolutely instrumental in what we've been able to do with divergent diabetes in the last 5 years. And now I am pursuing a master's degree right now. I'm in the middle of a master's of science in health education and behavior. Something that's very interesting to me is the personal and environmental reasons for why some people make a change and other people don't or can't. So what makes some people successful? What are the factors that have helped us to get to where we are when there are so many other people that are stuck? Is it a lack of information? Is it a lack of support? Is it that they don't know how to take action? how are all of these factors coming together? So the health education aspect of it is really fascinating to me, and helping to get people past all of these factors that are keeping them stuck where they are, unhappy and unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's fascinating how this journey has really helped me personally, but in doing so has helped the greater diabetes community.
Oh, I go through so much of this, just what you were talking about right there, because this 2 months ago, I enrolled in, through Adapt a Life, Dr.
Mhm.
Westman. He's got
Yes.
a sugar and food addiction course where he's got a
Mhm.
premier doctor in this world. Um, and yeah, because I'm just like, as I work with more and more people, and similar kind of a thing, I was working doing other things,
Mhm.
and all of a sudden I had to start writing because I didn't have the time to take somebody down my couple 100-hour rabbit hole of what I learned, and I didn't know yet how to say it in bite-sized pieces. So I had to start writing it, and then that led to
Mhm.
handing it out. But some people could grab it and run with it, and a lot of people, and I think it's really kind of coming down to both the psychology of the habits that we have and what we have to go through to break habits and create new habits. But there's definitely a sugar addiction, and we'll
Mhm.
call it food addiction, because so much of the food that the average person eats just turns to sugar anyhow once it's metabolized. Thus the definition of a carbohydrate. And so, yeah, I would love to stay in contact through time and learn more about what you're putting
Mhm.
together with all of this, and as you write about it, because I think it's such a key. Because I know people who just struggle, that they know what they should be doing,
Mhm.
they aren't getting there yet. There's barriers that are keeping them from getting there, and it comes down to figuring those things out. Because once you start doing consistently, it just starts happening. But then social triggers and family triggers and who you're living with
Mhm.
and all of these different things can take you down all these potential negative rabbit holes. So you are actually
Yes.
people won't pick up on this, and I don't know if we said it, I can't remember, but because you have what I'll call a Midwest accent. You told me you grew up in the Twin Cities, and I'm here in
I did.
Milwaukee. And I was like, wow, because I remember listening to you talk with Dr. Scherer, and I'm like,
Mhm.
she doesn't sound like somebody who lives in Spain. So
Yes.
you're in Spain, but you have coaches. Is it from all around the world? And do you do multiple languages that you work with people in?
We do, yes. We have Allison Hershey in the United States. We have Lucia Faito Ayonca, who is here in Spain, and she works in Spanish. Well, also in English as well, but primarily focused on the Spanish-speaking population. And Carol Bosco, who is also in the United States, but she is from from Brazil and speaks Portuguese. So most of her clients are Portuguese speaking. And yes, we have some adjunct staff who are helping us with certain projects that we're working on. And right now, so those 3 different languages that we're focused on, we're thrilled to be able to get this information out to all of these different populations.
How many different continents do you have type 1s that you're working with?
I used to keep track of this, how many different US states and continents and countries that we have worked with people in. And I think I as far as continents go, it's every one of them except for Antarctica, of course. But as far as US states, it's been most of them. Countries, it's quite a few around the world. Certainly, we're focused mostly on the US and Canada. That's always been our 2 main countries. And following that very closely has been the UK, Australia, typical US, or excuse me, typical English speaking countries. But there are lots more people coming from Europe now. And it's really interesting that no matter where people are in the world, they're relaying stories of the exact same type of medical care that we've been talking about. That's so common in the US. Medical professionals generally aren't much help for type 1 diabetics. They keep saying, oh, doing what you do, keep doing what you're doing great. And we're saying, but we don't feel great. We have all of these other health issues. Come on, there has to be something that we can do about this. And doctors are just saying, okay, eat whatever you want and bolus for it. And bolus meaning take a dose of rapid acting insulin for it. And of course, that doesn't work very well. So we are here to say that there is an alternative. Low carb diabetes management, also called therapeutic carbohydrate reduction, works. It is effective. It can greatly reduce the amount of insulin that you're using. It can help you lead a happier, healthier, longer term life. I feel like I have my life back. I've been doing this for 9 years personally. It is sustainable. That is one of the things that people say, oh, it's not sustainable. You can't keep doing this for, more than a few months. It's absolutely sustainable. But we do believe that people need support in doing this because they're not going to get the support from their medical professionals. They're not going to get the support necessarily from their families. Lots of people, this is foreign information to many people. So being able to have a supportive community who understands your goals and will help you every step along the way is so, so very important. And I've really created what I wish I had when I first started, because so many of us just have to embark on this on our own and say, okay, well, I'm taking a leap and I hope it works. I hope I'm safe. I hope, especially as somebody who uses insulin, you're kind of stepping forward on a wish and a prayer and saying, okay, nothing else has ever worked. But that's why we've really created this company to help people who want more for themselves and their diabetes management in a supportive and safe environment.
Well, I'm going to build on that for just a quick second because I have a context and nuance. My coaching clients that's my favorite phrase. Everything's based on context and nuance because not everybody starts in the same place. And everybody needs, and there are people where you're going to make a change. You got to let your doctor know, which sometimes can freak out the doctor because the doctor still associates ketosis with negative, diabetic ketoacidosis, and that's not what we're talking about. But with this, there's a whole spectrum of therapeutic carbohydrate restriction.
Yes.
And, it kind of starts, low carb kind of starts in the 125 to 50 carbish, and everybody's got slightly different. There's not hard, fast dictionary definitions of all these things. But to really, for most people, start flirting with living in ketosis, you're kind of in the 15 under carb world. But then there's that spectrum, and you can be there as a vegetarian, so you don't have to be doing this just all as one style of eating. So I'll ask you about, do you work with vegetarians at all that are trying to do this, and any certain challenges that they might have? But then at the other end of the spectrum, and nothing's ever true zero carb, because even if you're on a lion diet, which is a form of the carnivore diet, there's still a certain amount of glycogen, just like you have glycogen in all of your muscle cells. I have it in mine. That the animal that we're eating has it in theirs as well. So there's always a certain amount of things coming in, but a lot of people refer to it as zero carb, or we'll just use the general term carnivore. Do you have people that are across that whole spectrum and finding success with all of that, and any unique circumstances from those different spectrums? Yes,
we work with people who are vegetarian, either for, personal or religious reasons. We work with people who are all the way on the other side of the spectrum and are very high fat carnivore for, other belief or health reasons. And so it really is an individualized approach. Now, Dr. Bernstein's Diabetes Solution book recommends 30 grams of carbohydrates total. And while we use his framework, we don't subscribe to any sort of hard and strict carbohydrate limit. We want people to feel good both mentally and physically. For some people, that's carnivore. That's fantastic. For other people, they might need more carbohydrates in their diet every day. 30 might feel just too strict for them, and that's absolutely okay. There is a spectrum, like you said, of carbohydrate reduction that we all have to find for ourselves, what feels good personally, and what helps us meet our with type 1 diabetes, what helps us meet our blood sugar goals. Certainly reducing the carbohydrates can help. Further reducing carbohydrates can further dial in blood sugar levels, but of course that's, like I said, very personal. As far as vegetarian, it can easily be done. Vegetarian, I've found, is much easier than vegan. Vegan can be challenging, although there are low carb vegans as well. So while it might be a little bit more difficult, it is also possible. Vegetarians tend to opt more for, dairy proteins, eggs, tofu, things like that. They might have a slightly higher carb count if they want to incorporate potentially some other legumes or something like that into their diet, generally in very small quantities. Hemp hearts, things like that have a lot of nutritional value. And can provide some protein as well. So it's all possible. Certainly challenges, I think, in both extremes, but not unsurmountable challenges.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to come back to where you were talking about the need of support. And there are some people that maybe more the you and me, our personal stories, as far as kind of just suddenly diving in and becoming obsessed and singularly focused on it. And but your average person isn't going to do that. And especially, let's just paint the picture of your average type 1 who is more standard American diet and is just completely doing these large boluses of insulin all the time. Even the we'll say both type 1, type 2, because it's the same scenario, that not only is it important to have just some social cohesion and guidance and realizing that what you're doing is healthy, is supported in the medical literature and everything like this. It can, if you are a person who's on different medications right now beyond the need of the insulin, and you move into this now new or get reintroduced to our native metabolism, the physiologic state of ketosis, the body starts rapidly healing. And suddenly the need for the blood pressure, the need for the SSRI, the need for all these different things isn't there, because we're now solving the root cause of what's driving all of these things. And if there isn't a plan put together with the person's physician, they could wind up going hypotensive. They could go hypoglycemic. We don't want people falling down stairs. We don't want people passing out while they're driving, and all of the obvious negative ramifications. So not only is it maybe if you're on the sugar addiction spectrum that you need help to get off of all of that, but there's if you're on some decent, or that's not the proper terminology, if you're on some medications, there's pitfalls in front of you that while you're healing, you got to be aware of. You suddenly become overprescribed,
right?
Just because you've changed your physiologic state and gone back to to our native one. So, yes. Anything else you'd like to add on that? Quick.
Yes, that's very important to. That's very important to raise awareness about that, because, like you said, as we are healing our bodies, chances are you will need to reduce or potentially even eliminate those medications. So it is very important to be aware of the types of symptoms that might be showing you that, with blood pressure medication, if you're experiencing more dizziness or or things like that, that might, or a hypostatic, I'm forgetting my words right now, but when you get up off of a chair and you're like, oh, I'm feeling a little dizzy here, blood pressure isn't able to catch up as quickly. Those are certainly things to be talking to your doctor about and working with your doctor to reduce those medications or potentially eliminate them completely. A lot of people, when they are talking to their doctors, they might avoid the use of the words ketogenic diet. They might avoid the use of the word low carb diet because those words tend to have a very knee-jerk reaction from the doctors. I don't encourage anybody to lie to their doctors, but certainly test the waters. You might say, I'm reducing my carbohydrate consumption. I'm focusing on smarter carbs, which is absolutely the truth. Focusing on more whole foods, more home cooked meals. All of those things are the truth for the type of foods that we're eating. In many cases, we have heard stories of people telling this to their doctors, and their doctors say, yeah, I follow low carb too. I just can't recommend it to you, which is powerful, but yet horrible that they cannot recommend it to their clients. That's maybe another whole topic entirely here, but it's important to work with our medical professionals to tell them about your carbohydrate reduction, but maybe without using those buzzwords of keto, which tends to have a negative reaction from some doctors.
I'll tell you what I use with my coaching clients and friends that I just talked to about this kind of stuff. I go, I think this is the most, you tell me what you think. That I am undertaking a modified Mediterranean diet, and I realize that I might wind up needing to come off of some medications as a result of eating healthier foods, and just leave it at that. And I've coached them a little bit more that, well, what does modified mean? Well, I'm not having as much bread and processed stuff that could be in the Mediterranean world, and that usually tends to get zero pushback. But until they're taught both sides of ketosis in med school or CME or wherever they wind up getting it, it's scary that we have to kind of play these little word games to make sure that the doctor doesn't wind up sabotaging what could wind up being a life-changing.
Right. But that is a perfect script to be able to inform the doctor that you're making a change in your dietary intake, and to also point out the fact that medications might need to be reduced and that you are being proactive about this. So that's beautiful. Yep. I love that.
Absolutely. Well, I know we're near up your time limit. Lisa, I can't thank you enough for responding so quickly and coming on and sharing your wealth of information with my small but growing audience at this point in time. So where it says Divergent Diabetes in right here on the screen. So do they just go to your website? What's the best way of reaching out to you if there are people interested in your services?
Diaverge.com, spelled exactly how you see it here, DIAVERGE.com, and Diaverge Diabetes all run together on Facebook and Instagram. Those are the best ways to get in touch with me.
It works because that's how I got in touch with her, and she responded immediately. I was actually taken back by how quick you came back with it. Yes, I'd love to come on. So Lisa, thank you so much for being with us today. Best of luck. I want to hear more about what you're learning in your master's course as time goes by. And let me just stop recording. And
thank you so much, Brett.